Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. Snow had no business here. Not real snow. Just wind-blown dust that clung to the reinforced glass like regret. The shuttle hissed open before coming to a full stop. She stepped out, boots pressing into soil that had never known softness. Her hood stayed low, shoulders squared, not to project strength, but to contain something cracked. The kind of posture forged from too many glances held too long in rooms filled with questions no one dared ask out loud. Heat didn't carry well in that place. Even inside, metal held a chill that crawled up sleeves and made silence hum louder. Across the control bay, movement, precise, unhurried, already watching. He didn't stand up. No shift of weight, no smile offered. Just eyes meeting hers for a beat too long before returning to the monitor. A small nod. That was it. Her clearance chip clicked against the access pad. No welcome. No introduction. Just a line of green blinking once before the door slid aside. The hallway waited like a throat. Lights recessed into the ceiling, colorless, cold, humming at a frequency designed to be ignored but never quite succeeded. Inside the assignment deck, instructions glowed on wall panels, sharp and dry. Both had roles. She read hers without expression, thumb hovering above the confirm icon before pressing down. No chair pulled out for her. No mention of her name. Just a motion toward the equipment locker, and a muttered designation number. Voice clip. Train. Empty of interest. Not dismissive. Just exact. On the far side of the station, metal creaked under its own tension. Climate systems struggling to keep pace with the lunar cycle. The hiss of distant hydraulics broke the silence once, long enough for her to glance sideways. Not at him. At the wall behind him. A surface scratched by old gloves, helmets tossed carelessly, maybe by hands long gone. That night, her bunk smelled faintly of dust and oxidized iron. The mattress hadn't been changed. A crease down the center suggested whoever came before hadn't lasted long. She sat without removing the hood. Breath slow. Palms pressed against thighs. Her shadow doubled in the dim light, broken by the frame of the bunk rail. Across the thin corridor, faint movement through the slit under the door. Same pace as earlier. Same posture. Nothing urgent, nothing curious. Just presence. That kind that fills a room without noise. At 0-100, comms clicked once across the hallway. Report at 6. Nothing more. She stared at the wall until her eyes burned, lids dry, too afraid to close them. Not from fear of him. From memory. Skin still remembered the last time she trusted a face too quickly. Beneath the hood, her jaw ached from clenching. Hands never left her lap. Outside, the wind had picked up. The artificial kind. Recycled atmosphere pushed through vents that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Something about the way it brushed past the seams in the walls made her shiver harder than the cold. No dreams came. Only pressure behind her eyes and the sound of distant footsteps that refused to echo. Morning in that place didn't arrive with light. It arrived with noise, mechanical whines from corridor servos, boots striking tile in tight, rhythmic steps, the low groan of pipes that had absorbed too many winters without complaint. Days blurred into each other without ceremony. No greetings. No idle talk. Just the same stretch of silence, carried from one end of the station to the other like a sealed envelope no one dared open. She moved like vapor, gliding from quarters to systems panel, then back again. Always covered. Always quiet. Meals skipped. Logs submitted with precision. Not a second late. No mistakes. He noticed, not with interest, but with the sort of attention predators reserve for things that move too carefully. Across the atrium, weight clanged against reinforced alloy. He trained alone. Reps counted in silence. Sweat soaked through the back of his uniform, but nothing ever slowed. Not the strain in his arms. Not the tightness in his jaw. Motion for its own sake. As if stillness had once hurt worse than impact. Their paths crossed only when the system forced it. A miscalibrated temperature coil in the lower crawlspace. Cooling failure in the habitat block. Twice during inspections. Once during a panel reset when both had to reach for the same control. That was the moment. Light from the overhead panel flickered briefly before stabilizing. Her sleeve caught on the edge of a pipe. The fabric slid halfway up her forearm. He didn't look away. Skin no longer smooth. Raised lines, uneven, raw even after healing. The mark of flame. Not fresh, but never allowed to forget. She pulled her arm back too quickly. The motion betrayed nothing at first glance, but the breath she held lasted half a second longer than needed. Not fear. Something colder. Shame held too long inside a locked room. Shame polished until it passed for composure. He said nothing. Hands returned to the panel. Wires reconnected. Diagnostics ran clean. But something shifted. Not in posture. Not in tone. In pressure. The way silence now pressed harder against walls. The way footsteps paused longer outside closed doors. The way his eyes lingered not out of curiosity, but recognition. On her way back through the corridor, she passed the training module. The display still glowed from earlier use. A warning flashed. Joint stress exceeds safety threshold. She stared only a second before walking on. That night, her blanket wouldn't warm. The system worked fine. She checked twice. Nothing wrong with circuitry. But something inside her chest wouldn't settle. Not heat. Not cold. A friction that wouldn't fade. Across the wall, weight dropped again onto reinforced matting. No music played. No timer buzzed. Just breath and motion. No one asked questions in that place. They just listened. Quietly. Waiting to see who cracked first. Every motion carried weight, but not always the kind meant for lifting. She walked into the diagnostics wing that morning with her face as unreadable as stone, eyes moving like they'd memorized every shadow before it appeared. The body next to the equipment rack turned slightly, barely. No greeting, no question, just that same pause she'd grown used to. But something different had lodged itself in the pause. Not doubt. Not disdain. Something slower. Her wrist brushed the interface screen. The scanner beeped once. Across the room, arms crossed without tension. Eyes didn't look away this time. Not when she keyed in the sequence. Not when she adjusted the vent seal. Not when she turned slightly toward the coolant line and pulled up her sleeve without realizing. That glance didn't land where she expected. Not on skin. On fingers. On the way they hesitated above the valve. Like he was reading something in the gaps between her movements. She left quickly after that. Boots moving faster than necessary. No footsteps followed. Just the weight of that glance, carried all the way to her quarters where no one could see her pull off the jacket and sit on the bunk with her hands pressed against her temples. Silence stretched long into artificial night. Hallway lights dimmed, one panel at a time. Something in her refused to lie down. A sound broke the rhythm. Not mechanical. Not accidental. Heavy thud. Followed by another. Then another. No speech. No music. Just impact. Body against bag, over and over with no pause to catch breath. She sat up, spine tight, unsure what stirred harder in her chest. The noise or the fact that it didn't stop. Another hit. Not quick. Not wild. Precise. Controlled. Too much strength held back for too long. She stepped barefoot to the door, didn't open it, only stood beside the frame, breathing with her head tilted against the seam. The bag groaned under the force. Metal base scraped softly across the padded floor. No grunt. No exhale. No noise beyond contact. She turned away from the door but couldn't return to the bed. Couldn't forget the rhythm. Couldn't stop wondering why the hits felt less like training and more like confession. One more strike. Harder than the rest. Followed by nothing. She sat on the edge of the bed until morning arrived without asking. Warning lights pulsed without sound. Red bars across the display monitors blinked twice, held for 3 seconds, then vanished. No alarms. No blaring announcement. Just the message, solar flare activity inbound. Communications suspended. Power grid compromised. life support rerouted. Inside the corridor, lights dimmed by a fraction too much. Not enough to panic. Just enough to make every surface seem colder. Climate regulation snapped into emergency override. Her breath caught on the second exhale. Not from fear. From recognition. She'd trained through this protocol. She knew what came next. Thermal retention priority. Personnel consolidation. The message repeated once across the intercom. Short burst. Monotone. Her locker stuck for a second before it opened. Inside, heat trap gear crumpled, the kind not used unless necessary. She hesitated. Fingers hovered over the fabric, unsure whether to carry it or wear it. She chose neither. Doors clicked open with too much finality. Across the base, footfalls matched hers. Neither quickened their pace. No rush. No questions. Just quiet calculation of how long before the outpost lost containment level warmth. The chamber door recognized both credentials at once. Lock disengaged. Air hissed through the seal, warmer than the hallway but still thin. The chamber was built for survival, not comfort. 2 cots. 1 heat core. No walls between. She stepped in without looking sideways. Bag placed beneath the cot. Jacket removed in one slow motion, as if peeling off a second skin rather than clothing. Underneath, the body was lean, marked, and closed. She faced the far wall, arms crossed, not out of modesty, but to brace against memory. The second cot creaked. No speech. No acknowledgement. Only the sound of boots removed, gear adjusted, motion arranged in patterns meant to suggest calm. Temperature dropped outside the chamber. Inside, it climbed too slowly. The heat core pulsed with every cycle. Not enough for distance. Barely enough for 2 bodies not touching. She drew the blanket over her shoulders without shifting her gaze. Light overhead narrowed to conserve output. Darkness settled not in abruptness, but in layers. 1 breath at a time. He moved once. Just once. Enough to adjust position. Enough for the cot to sound again. Enough for her to feel the air shift. Nothing spoken. The chamber closed them in without apology. No exit. No distraction. Only silence and heat rationed between 2 people who knew better than to speak when words might break something they'd spent too long trying to keep from falling apart. Heat crawled up from the floor vents in uneven pulses, carrying that recycled metallic scent no purifier could mask. The blanket clung to her like armor, edge gripped tightly between both hands, spine curled in toward the wall as though distance could still be negotiated. 1 leg pulled higher, heel tucked beneath thigh, body locked in angles that suggested rest but allowed none. Across the room, fabric rustled. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just real. 1 boot already off. The other scraped faintly as it was dragged loose. Layers peeled, one at a time, not for comfort, but survival. No breath from her, no shift in posture, only the soft tightening of shoulders as a jacket dropped onto the cot's edge. Stillness grew heavier with each passing second. Not absence of sound, but tension strung between 2 lungs too proud to exhale first. Light above had dimmed to a low amber hue, neither kind nor cold, just enough to suggest they hadn't been forgotten. His voice came without preamble. Dry, low, the kind shaped more by fatigue than intention. He spoke of replacements. Joints first, nothing you could see until it was too late. Followed by implants, reflex correction, muscle augmentation, circulatory filtration to withstand gravitational strain. All done without request. Signed off by someone 3 ranks above. He didn't call it violation. Didn't need to. The way he described it left no room for confusion. She didn't answer. Didn't turn. Breath barely moved. But 1 hand lowered slightly from her shoulder, resting near her ribs. Not relax. Anchored. He said they'd told him it would improve performance. He repeated the phrase as if testing it for truth. Improve performance. Nothing said about how it would feel to sit in a room and wonder what part of you still belonged to you. A small sound escaped her throat. Not agreement. Not sympathy. Something thinner. Almost mechanical. His weight shifted. Cot springs murmured beneath him. No movement toward her. Just presence. Different from before. Not invading. Not watching. Just there. Her eyes fixed on the condensation forming along the inner wall. One drop slipped down, left a narrow trail, disappeared at the seam. She didn't blink. He mentioned the side effects last. The kind that didn't show in scans. The loss of appetite. The silence inside the chest where instinct used to live. He said it without emotion. As if trying to remember what emotion had felt like before calibration. She listened without turning. Let the heat press against her back without loosening her grip on the blanket. Let his words settle into the room the way warmth does. Slow, invasive, necessary. Still no reply. Still no movement. But something in her no longer pulled away. The blanket slipped lower over one shoulder. Not from sleep. Sleep had not arrived. Too many thoughts pressed too close, stealing space inside her skull. Heat pooled at her back, pulsing against cloth. Breath held, then released, not in rhythm with anything but the need to stay quiet. Words came without preface. Quiet, careful, almost unfinished. She asked if it ever mattered to him, being touched for who he was, not for what someone else made him into. The silence after her question didn't stretch. It sat. No intake of breath. No sharp pivot. Just stillness, and a delay long enough to question if he'd answer at all. Then the voice returned. Same low tone, slightly rougher this time. He didn't think he'd ever known what that kind of touch felt like. Said it plain. Not regretful. Not angry. Just truth spoken like a confession too old to carry weight anymore. Her face didn't move. Just the hand beneath the blanket curling tighter against her ribs. Not out of cold. Out of something heavier. Inches separated them. Enough that neither touched. Not enough for it to feel distant. Air between them changed. Denser. Slower. A pull neither acknowledged. He shifted slightly on the cot. One elbow rested against the edge. Fingers against thigh. Every motion minimal. Controlled. But the body no longer angled away. She stared ahead, eyes fixed on nothing, mouth parted just enough to draw shallow air. A thought moved across her face but died before it found language. The hum of the heat core deepened. Lights dipped again. Shadows gathered in the creases between neck and collarbone. Neither turned. Neither looked directly at the other. But breath matched breath. Close enough that silence began to feel shared. Nothing in his voice asked for permission. Nothing in hers resisted. Not a word more was spoken. The space between skin and warmth did not close. But it waited. Charged not by touch, but by everything both knew had never been offered to them without condition. Breath warmed the edge of her shoulder. Not from distance. From closeness that hadn't asked permission but hadn't crossed a line either. Skin didn't touch at first. Just presence. Just the suggestion of nearness, suspended in quiet. She hadn't turned to face him. The blanket remained between them, thin but intentional. Yet warmth traveled across it, not through heat alone, but from the unmistakable knowledge that someone lay beside her who had chosen not to fill silence with comfort or words. His hand moved without sound. Nothing about it rushed. Fingertips passed the seam of the blanket, paused at the edge of her hip. No grasp. No pressure. Just weightless contact. The kind that asked without asking. Flesh met scar. Not by mistake. Not grazed. Found. She inhaled sharply, not from pain, but from reflex. The body always flinched first. Memory arrived faster than trust. Muscles pulled, shoulders shifted, spine coiled toward retreat. But the hand didn't retreat. It stayed. Not tightened. Not insistent. Still. Warm. Real. She almost turned away. Almost. Movement began at her neck. Hair shifted. Weight rolled into her elbow. Blanket lifted by a centimeter. But before her body could withdraw completely, his hand responded. Not with force. With guidance. A slow pull. A motion so gentle it didn't feel like possession but understanding. She froze. The scar stretched beneath his palm. Raised skin caught the low light, uneven, hardened, the kind that had once blistered, broken, sealed under the wrong conditions. She never let anyone see it, let alone touch. But his hand didn't move away. Fingers traced its edges as if reading. As if the story it told deserved to be known without shame. No sharp breath from him. No hesitation. Just the slow, certain path of touch across the place she hated most. Blanket slipped further. Not pulled. Released. She didn't speak. Couldn't. Eyes stayed forward. But her hand shifted under the fabric, reached back, not to push, not to hold, just to rest. Touch remained. No part of her turned away again. Breath caught between them, thin and warm, hovering just beneath her jaw. His hand stayed anchored where scar met skin, not tracing now, only resting, as if the act of staying there mattered more than movement. No sound broke the room except for the low hum of the failing generator that couldn't decide whether to hold warmth or let it slip. She whispered without turning. The words barely escaped her mouth. "You don't have to pretend." No hesitation followed. "I'm not." 3 words. Nothing elaborate. Nothing offered beyond what was necessary. Yet something inside her folded the moment they landed. She didn't close her eyes. Just lay there, unmoving, except for the subtle flex of her fingers against the cot's edge. Tension that had held her together for months without cracking softened without permission. He leaned in slowly. Not with hunger. Not with force. The motion held no message except presence. His forehead pressed to hers, gently, as if to say I'm still here without needing breath to carry it. Heat passed between skin. Not from temperature. From nearness. From weight shared without demand. Her lips parted slightly. Not to speak. Only to feel air draw through the space between them. He didn't pull back. Didn't press forward. Just stayed there, as if this contact, forehead to forehead, was the only architecture he trusted. One hand lifted. Moved along her waist. Found the beginning of the scar again, just above the curve of her ribcage. This time, the tracing was deliberate, careful, slow enough to memorize, soft enough to comfort. No recoil. Only stillness. Not stiff. Not paralyzed. Just quiet. She let him follow the line of damaged flesh without pulling away. Let him touch what no one had touched since the field medic had wiped away blood and whispered you're lucky to be alive. This wasn't luck. This was choice. Every movement from him said so. Not with words. Not with performance. With patience. With respect that didn't shrink away or try to heal what wasn't broken anymore. The shape of her body hadn't changed. But inside something shifted. Something tired gave out. Not in defeat. In trust. Light never returned. The chamber held them in that same low amber, humming faintly beneath the sound of breath. Her eyes stayed open, not from fear, not from waiting, just unwilling to miss any part of what had settled around her. The cot beneath her body felt too narrow, too thin to carry all she'd locked away, but she didn't shift, didn't tighten her limbs, didn't reach for the blanket she'd always pulled up out of habit. His arm stayed across her side. No pressure, no restraint, just contact, warm and steady, not seeking, only there. She lay without speaking, without covering the marks that ran along her ribs, across her shoulder, down toward the curve of her hip. The scars hadn't changed. Raised skin. Uneven pigment. Some so old they looked as though they'd belonged to another life. She always treated them that way. Separate. Shameful. A kind of currency she paid in silence and distance. Tonight, no transaction. Not hidden. Not explained. Just present. His hand never moved to erase them. Never recoiled. It rested close, sometimes tracing, sometimes still, always with intention that said this belongs to you, and that's enough. The air felt thicker than before. Not suffocating. Closer. Shared between two bodies who knew the cost of pretending to feel nothing. She blinked slowly. Muscles soft beneath her skin. Not slack. Not weak. Relaxed in a way that had taken years to remember. Stillness that didn't ask for defense. Her breathing shifted once. Deepened slightly. Caught. Resumed. He exhaled. Not loud. Not performative. A breath that carried with it no agenda, no request. Only acceptance. No barrier remained between her skin and his presence. Nothing to hide behind. And for the first time in a long chain of nights, she didn't reach for distance. Didn't fold inward. Didn't flinch from being seen. She wasn't asleep. Not even close. But she no longer watched the door. No longer scanned for weakness in the room's design. Her eyes stayed forward. Unblinking. Soft. What pressed between them was not passion. Not possession. Something quieter. Something that held her body without requiring it to change. The scars hadn't vanished. They never would. But they no longer meant failure. They meant return. They meant pain survived. They meant this moment. Bare skin, open breath, a touch that didn't ask for explanation. And he was still there. Still touching. Still holding.